How's it going, everyone? Dylan Abernathy here. What I wanted to do today is just bring you a pretty quick breakdown, actually, of this scene that I made. So this was kind of the first big attempt that I made at making an outdoor scene. I learned a ton of new stuff here, and since I ended up gathering a lot of resources in the process and learning quite a bit, I thought it would be pretty useful to a lot of people to break down what I learned, share some of the resources. I have them preloaded here. And yeah, kind of make this a bit simpler for those of you who want to try and learn more organic stuff and world building for like an exterior scene. I've always focused on the props and interior scenes and stuff like that. And obviously there's a lot of overlap between the two of them, but it is definitely tackling like a totally new thing altogether when you're jumping into this stuff. So I thought it could be helpful. A scene of this size is definitely what I'd recommend. So I kind of want to actually go through. There's a video down here where I go through all the screenshots of the process along the way. So I kind of want to break down my thought process, where I learned the resources, and kind of the attitude you might want to have tackling something like this if you're new and still learning, estimated times, stuff like that. I always found these kind of videos pretty helpful, and I think this is going to be really good, especially if you're a student or someone trying to give yourself a challenge, even if you're just doing this stuff for fun. So let's go ahead and dive into that. I'm going to bring up the screenshots that I have here. So these are just all the stills from that video. And let's start at the very beginning and go back and forth between these two. So this is kind of the first real screenshot, I guess, that's sort of showing off the composition. You've probably heard this in a million different places, but reference is key. I did a lot of research. I had my PureRef board filled with reference, and this is kind of the main composition that I really liked. I like this for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, I wanted something simple. This was a lot of new stuff coming my way all at the same time. So I wanted to make sure it was something that I could bite off at without taking more than I can chew, essentially. So I thought something like this is simple. If I can learn how to do rocks, remember how to do landscape materials and some basic lighting, like that'll get me 90% of the way there, right? So make sure you're starting off on something that's not too ambitious. Obviously, it's very admirable to try and do something super big, but when you do something overly large, you hit a point where you're no longer learning and you're just doing work. And I wanted to make sure that, every day I was learning something new, and I thought this would be a good foundation for that because say I was working full time on this scene, I think this would have been like a 4 to 6 week project around that time. If you're doing this in school, I would say, yeah, 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. Obviously, this took me quite a bit longer since I'm working a full-time job. I think it ended up taking me just around 2 months in my spare time, which for personal projects, I'd prefer if it was a little bit shorter, but it is what it is. I just wanted to give you guys a time breakdown since a lot of people, myself included, always like to hear how long these things kind of take. So I kind of laid things out based on this composition here. I liked it because there were some areas of rest with the sky. There was some big, like this whole chunk here is very similar. So you could also maybe classify it as an area of rest, like this part of the rock at least. But it is kind of noisy, but it's also nice because everything, as far as the composition goes, is more or less dragging your eyes up to the lighthouse. So I thought if I could have that moving, it could breathe a lot of life. Like this rock's pointed there, this is going up, which points there. Horizontally, the rocks are building up towards the lighthouse. So I knew I wanted to add a lot of movement, and I think it would be great to tie it all together with that lighthouse. So as I sort of put this stuff in, I started with this rock and scaled everything else accordingly, pushing it back, making sure there was some depth to the scene because I knew I wanted to blur some things out at some points. And going back to that first image, I just wanted to show this off. To make sure you get things scaled right, scale the object based on reference or whatever real life units are, and then sort of push it back according to the camera. So I found on Wikipedia how big lighthouses usually are, scaled mine accordingly based on the kind of lighthouses I wanted to make, and scaled it back then. And that way, when I sort of blur things with the camera or add fog, it's going to be physically accurate, and I'm not going to have to fake anything. So that's why this is so far back, and it looks so huge still. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I got that accurate. Moving forward, just sort of refining these shapes a little bit more, and then I brought them all to the origin of Maya, exported, re-imported inside of Unreal and reset things up. So the FOV of the camera is a little bit different, so that's why this seems so much further away. But if I plop the camera back into the middle, you can see that we've essentially made the same thing here. So yep, once again in game you can see the depth is there. Things are a little bit wonky, of course, because the field of view I think is 90 by default. I might be wrong, but that's different than what I wanted the camera to be. So just kind of showing off that there might be some differences there, but I'm building things to camera specifically for this. Moving ahead, this is kind of the first real development as far as look dev or whatever you want to call it. I've gone ahead and made a landscape material for the landscape that we made in the previous part. There's a million tutorials on this, so I'm not going to cover that. But I just made a basic landscape. This material here is nothing too special. I believe it is at this point just a material with some textures plugged into it, so there's no blending of any kind. As for the rocks though, I had made a test rock texture, and as you can see, the snow at this point is actually automatically detecting the top. So this isn't any kind of vertex painting, this isn't any specific type of unique texturing. This is a rock texture, and then this is automatically detecting where the top is, so even if I rotate it, it's going to stay at the top. So that's going to lead us to our first resource that I want to share. I believe it is... Nope. Here we go. Francois Hurtubise. I'm so sorry. I probably definitely butchered that, but this guy's work is incredible. This was a huge inspiration for this scene, actually. And if you scroll down, he did a pretty incredible breakdown of his snow material. He even included the blending mask. So I sort of followed this for the most part. I made a couple tweaks here and there just for convenience and easy reuse, but it's set up in a way where you can manually paint out with vertex painting. You can paint out areas you don't want snow, and then the rest is to auto detect where the top is, and as you can see, blend it very nicely, and you have a lot of control with this material. So highly recommend checking this guy out. Snowy Ruins UE4, incredible work. So let's go back. So I set that up. I don't think this was fully set up at this point. This was probably just following some YouTube tutorial, but I stumbled across that later, so I kind of wanted to plug it. Here, just kind of messing with the foreground. I knew I wanted to play with that, and messing with the fog a little bit more, just trying to get an atmosphere that I like. Originally, I kind of wanted to make things very blurry. I wanted a lot of fog, I wanted a lot of snow. I wasn't as confident as I should have been going into this about like the rocks and stuff. I thought since I was new to everything was going to just be like atrocious, so I'm like, oh, I can hide it with fog and smoke and all of that. That probably wasn't the best attitude to have. I ended up taking a bit more time and really polishing things out, and obviously it's not perfect, but I'm happy with the results. I ended up showing more off because of so, but I was starting to play with that a little bit more. Before we get too far, I also want to note one thing is I definitely had a list of goals that I wanted to learn going into this. So I already mentioned before, like exterior lighting, rocks, landscape materials, but also things like designer, particle effects, the new atmosphere tools, all of that. I'd recommend making a list and seeing all the interesting ways you can contribute those to the scene you're working on. So moving forward, we've finally gotten into adding this blending of the landscape material. Once again, there's a bunch of tutorials for this on YouTube, but I would really recommend checking out Jacob Norris or Pure Polygon. This guy has some incredible tutorials. So I learned the grass, quickly making some snow clumps, and the landscape material where we're blending multiple different snows into grass based on height, and including things like subsurface scattering and all of that. I learned that from his tutorials here. Once again, there's a bunch of different resources for this, but this guy is a really good teacher, so I'd just 100% recommend his stuff. And I didn't realize this, but it looks like his tutorials that I followed are actually free. So totally go check him out. Stuff is awesome, and I couldn't recommend it any more than I already do. So let's continue along. You can see I got some rocks in here. These were just some practice sculpts. I don't think any of these made it to the final, but it was just to sort of see how the snow material would react when I added more tweaks to it. And just once again adjusting lighting a little bit more just to sort of get a different vibe. This is the first kind of big jump, I think. So you can start to see things like clouds. I'm playing with the HDRI at this point. I ended up swapping the sky completely later, as you'll see. But we're getting some more rocks in here. the most notable ones are the main ones here, which will bring me to my next resource, and that is going to be the Essential Rock Creation Techniques by Daniel Castillo. This is a Level Up Digital tutorial. This is probably the best tutorial I found on rock creation. The guy is obviously a master. The thing about rocks is they're deceivingly simple. It's like not a lot of techniques, but a lot of practice required. So I recommend making some practice ones before doing anything too serious. But this is the place to go if you're new to rocks, which I was. I don't know how I've made it this far in my career without ever making rocks, but that's the case, and this tutorial helped me out a ton. So huge thanks to Level Up Digital and Daniel Castillo. Really great stuff there. And I started getting these rocks in place. I ended up tweaking the materials a little bit later on, but I wanted to see how this snow material started behaving on top. Moving forward, once again, I wanted to experiment more with foreground stuff to sort of frame things in place. I'm also blurring the background more, plus adding more fog and adding particles. And I'm starting to notice that the composition isn't feeling as snug as I'd like to. There's a lot of empty space. I do like areas of rest, but this is a little excessive. And one thing to note, it's very easy at this point in production when you're at your, like, say 40% done stage to feel very discouraged. It was around this part where I'm just like, okay, I learned, rock creation and landscape materials and stuff. Maybe I got all I can out of this and I want to quit. That's why you want to choose small scenes, right? Like if this was twice the size, I probably would have thrown in the towel around here just because it's a huge time investment. And if I learned what I wanted to, I wouldn't need to finish this off. But it's important to say, hey, like, you can keep chugging through this. There's really, even though it's deceivingly empty, there isn't a lot more to do. Like, let me go back here. And if we scroll down, these are all the props I made. So at this point, I have more or less all of this done. These things here, which are just like parts for the top of the lighthouse, I got these done in like an hour and a half, 2 hours. Like none of these have unique bakes. They're all blurred in the background, right? So that's super quick. And then these things, once again, like 1 day combined total. So I'm really not too far off. Same with the lighthouse, very, very basic model. So to be here and wanting to give up, it's like a week away from being something that you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So be wary of where you are. Be very mindful of if you're at that like 30 to 60% done phase where everything looks horrible. It's really easy to get discouraged, but keep plugging away. And I'm sure it'll turn out pretty cool. Pushing forward, starting to get a better feel for the tone here. At first I wanted to be like a very cool, desolate winter. I turned down the snow intensity quite a bit, and I don't think you can see it, but I have some fog planes that are rolling and moving like you saw on ArtStation. There was a lot of motion here. It's harder to see in the screenshots, but I think that's what was tying it all together, was giving it a feeling of being alive through the motion of the particle effects. And I'd actually taken the particle effects from one of the Unreal Engine like pre-made scenes that's free on the marketplace. The snow falling from the sky I made myself. That's simple enough. There's a bunch of tutorials to teach you that. But the rolling like fog cloud sheets, I just ended up borrowing those. You don't have to make absolutely everything from scratch. Like, I'm not a particle artist, so learning some of it is great, but I don't need to learn the entire system, so I thought I'd grab those, and it brought a lot to it. Here is where I could start to see the finish line, like the light at the end of the tunnel, right? So just going from here to here, you can kind of see the end once I start adding a little bit of set dressing. I made those snow clumps, like I said, from that tutorial, which just added quite a bit. It's still a bit messy, don't get me wrong, but it helped quite a bit. And the grass, I think adding a different color and the silhouette breakups here really just made it feel a bit more alive. Having some motion blurred in the foreground, I think it just helped a lot. So set dressing, maybe a little bit too early for set dressing. I probably should have finished all my placeholder stuff, but it was the motivation I needed to keep this going. I also just kind of put some fake light in here to kind of get a better idea of the composition. And yeah, this is where I started to get a little bit more hopeful and started enjoying the process quite a bit more. Here is where I started implementing the atmospheric sky. So one of the new things Unreal Engine added, and this is one of the main reasons I wanted to try out an outdoor scene, was a new atmospheric sky and volumetric clouds. This is an incredible tutorial on the Dynasty Empire here, making volumetric clouds in Unreal Engine. This is the newest version too, so this was like brand new. I had to update my project actually. But he goes over everything and includes actually the files you'll need if you just want to nab them. And goes over everything you need to know to make like beautiful sunsets. And this looks super realistic, right? So what I ended up doing was, let's see, get back here. I ended up plopping that in, having a lot of fun with just the color and sort of experimenting with the time of day and some lighting. I loved how it looked with the snow. It was also great for checking the silhouette actually, coincidentally, which I was becoming more happy with, having this sloping down and this kind of this third higher, this third lower, and this thing framed in the background. But as you can see, as I went at daytime, the lighting really helped to bring everything together. It's quite a bit busy, noisy, and muddied at the moment, but I think the framing is starting to get there. The snow material looks good with the subsurface scattering, having some light sort of poke through. And same with the grass, having subsurface scattering on the grass. So as you can see, like the lighting is really tying it together. Having clouds makes it feel a bit more realistic. I just need to make sure I get these placeholders done, and I can really start playing with the set dressing and the mood of things. So moving forward, I start adding in these trees. The camera's not blurring them the way that I want. I think these are still not completely done, but I'm liking the idea of adding a tree in front of the sun so the God rays are shining through. And just sort of populating it a bit more, making it feel like it's a piece of nature. So, yep, I pulled this forward a little bit more. Once again, just really framing things in. Some more grass here. Finally got these guys out of the placeholder stage so I can really position them the way I want to. And I think that's the end of the rocks, minus this one up here, but I ended up just reusing something here since it was so small and insignificant. But I can finally place things and sculpt the landscape exactly how I want to, and it's just a lot of polish at this point. This is just me taking it into Photoshop and messing with the colors and effects like particles, just to kind of see where do I want to take this, and it gives me kind of a reference to add to my board to kind of like work things towards. I had also at this point added the lighthouse in the background. Excuse me, and this was using a very, very simple model, like I said, because I knew it was going to be blurred. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, and using a mask to blend between painted brick and exposed brick. I didn't want to have to use vertex painting. I wanted this to just be very cheap and non-complicated, and ended up making a pretty cool material in the process. So it's just essentially using the UV2 to blend a custom mask I made between two materials. So fast forwarding, we're really getting close to the end here, messing with the colors a little bit more to have some warms in the background and cools in the foreground to kind of break things up a little bit. Some nice blurring here, really sort of carving out the frame to focus in on this lighthouse and this big rock here. Just some more set dressing and stuff going on. The lighthouse is now completed. This isn't quite spinning yet. This is still a placeholder light, but I also found some seagulls online that I just sort of put in here, and they fly around in the background. Another important thing was messing with the clouds and stuff like that. I really wanted to get that right, so I think this added quite a bit more to it. I might change it a little bit more in the next couple of screenshots, but I thought that helped a lot. And just kind of fixing some weird sort of areas, like this rock wasn't reading right, this poking through looked a little bit weird, so just sort of blending things in a little bit more, taking advantage of those clumps and all the things that we made and laying them out in a more interesting way. This is, I think, messing with some more lighting and post-processing. This light is now acting the way it should be. And this is kind of the final thing that tied it all together. So literally pretty much at the very end, as I was putting stuff together, Unreal Engine released a update that included a really simple ocean material. And that's exactly what I needed to tie this all together. With this being a lighthouse next to the water, I thought there's no harm in trying it out, and I just put it in here. And this is just a lucky coincidence, honestly. Because from here, I'm still pretty happy with how it's turning out. But I think this area here down here is a little noisy and busy and undefined, and down here it's too much of the same. It's hard to distinguish the foreground and background, and this lets there be like a clean cut line, really simplifies things up here, and it makes the scene make sense, right? Like this is a kind of a harbor front, so this kind of tied it all together. I got lucky finding this. Realistically, adding something like this in late at the last minute is a little risky. I'd recommend obviously having this stuff planned out, but I just ended up getting lucky with this. Perhaps I should have spent a bit more time in pre-production really planning this out. I never really had like a sketch or anything to go off of, just roughly that reference image. So I'd recommend for anybody who's going to be making a scene to really sketch out some kind of reference or something, because there was a lot of winging it. I'm not going to lie, which isn't definitely not the best method for that stuff, but got really lucky, like I said, with this and decided to move forward with it. Sharpen some stuff up. I think this is just lighting changes, to be honest. And then the final image. So I just sort of painted some of these areas a little bit more specifically, adjusted some of the coloring. At some point, I ended up making a second tuft of grass. It's a little bit longer, and swapping those out. And this is now spinning. And you can notice I'm not really worried with any of the background details here. Like this is a horribly simple model. I didn't even include it in the breakdown because it's so basic. You can see back here at some point I sort of terraformed the landscape to be a bit more interesting. And yeah, this is just everything with the post-processing done, the lighting tweaked a little bit more and brought into Photoshop. And one thing that's a little bit harder to illustrate, obviously, is just the movement. So there was movement the whole time. The trees were always moving, the grass was always moving. That made the God rays shine through a little bit more. The snow particles were blowing. I think that's what really tied it all together. Same with these like snow blowing particles here. But like I said, the one goal that I really wanted was to have everything sort of leaving an opening for this lighthouse to tie it all together through the movement. So that's kind of how I did it. Hopefully this breakdown makes things a little bit more digestible. Like I said, I always loved seeing these kind of breakdowns. I know this isn't super intensive, but I think this is hopefully going to be useful for people who are new to this to kind of figure out where to start with things. So once again, some good resources. This rock tutorial, volumetrics, forest ground snow material, incredible tutorial. So yeah, anything by Pure Polygons, and then this snow breakdown here by Francois. Really good stuff. One thing that I do want to note though is if you think this is like a little too intimidating to start, maybe you don't want to sculpt things, you're not comfortable with ZBrush or Maya, I would recommend just opening up Unreal and like seeing how far you can get with just a landscape in the volumetric sky or volumetric clouds and new atmosphere tools. It is crazy how good you can get things to look with just the sky pretty much on its own. The landscape is simple to work with, and now there's this ocean tool. Like, let me see if I can get to that Dynasty tutorial. Like, this is just like a sky that's built in with the engine, right? So if you just make a basic landscape, you can throw on some Quixel, you know, materials if you want to, and you can make a really realistic looking landscape in a day. So have fun with it. If this was useful, let me know. Hopefully it was. I do believe I'm going to be doing a more in-depth breakdown of this stuff on Experience Points' website soon in the form of an article, so look out for that. But in the meantime, it's been a while since I made a video, so I thought this would be appropriate, and hopefully you guys learned something from it. All right, hope everyone has a great day, and I'll catch you later. See ya.